I'm just a normal person who come to quite involuntarily come to own a small part of Swedish forest, and that's well, I'm a small-time forest farmer. That's the background, and here's a part from my book I wrote 1 year ago, 2 years ago. I move through the woods, dressed for the weather. It's several degrees below freezing, but dressing too warmly is a mistake. Once you start pushing through thickets, you inevitably work up sweat. I feel somewhat responsible for the forest now, not like with the children. With them, I'm completely responsible. The forest will get by. It doesn't really want my attentions. But in case someone asks, I want to be able to answer. How many spruces I have? How many hardwood trees? Are there any wind throws? If someone asks, I want to know. Social pressure forces me to find out. I'm going to manage my forest my way, and that requires standing up to people who think they are ever so knowledgeable about traditional industrial woodland managements. It's like an arms race of expertise. But I am of two minds. Our human knowledge has, generally speaking, not exactly done the forest much good. The ideal approach would be to just stroll around, fascinated by the diversity, complexity, and grandeur, and to answer the question, how does this work? With the simple, awestruck, I don't know. The biggest upside to be responsible, the biggest upside to the responsibility I feel toward my forest is that I often have reason to head out into it. There's always something to inspect. How is a planting site getting on? Have moose eaten any of the pine seedlings? Is the mature stand ready for harvest? Are the trees too large? What about the undergrowth? But it always ends up with me walking around aimlessly, not because I want to, but because I get lost. I'm not convinced the inventories are that important anyway. Things probably work out regardless. I think to myself, there are paw prints. I think to myself, there are paw prints in the thin layer of snow. I study my own and the foxes and the deers. If I look closely enough, I can guess how old they are. Some are covered in an almost invisible powder. They are almost certainly at least 24 hours old. The ones that are empty are fresher. I'm probably being watched right now by someone who just slunk away. I think about what I read the other day in my dad's old woodland management textbook from the 1960s. The book's sole focus is how to best exploit the forest's resources. But it does indirectly teach its reader about the forest itself as well. A forest, I read, is a collection of trees, dense and numerous enough to cause conditions amongst the trees in question, including shade, wind, nutritional competition, etc., to be characterized primarily by the trees themselves. End quote. That could be a description of the biosphere as a whole. Enough nature to cause its life conditions to be characterized by nature itself. I look around and feel the wind push a damp chill through my jacket. I should have worn my thick coat. That's it.
That's a very nice fragment of your book, which is composed of fragments. It's a collection of experiences, thinking, reflections, descriptions of life moments. Now it works. And what I find interesting in your book, I mean, many things are interesting in this book, but one interested me more is this turn to nature that we find in contemporary literature. I was rereading Baudelaire not long ago, the painter of modern life. And for the modernists, I think nature was horrible. It was civilization and men and the city they cared about and wrote about. And nature, Baudelaire says, it is abominable. Yeah, all the source of evil is nature and the animals and men and mankind is so beautiful and so nice. And now I see, for example, in Olga Tokarczuk's work, she's also writing about animals, about nature, with a very different view of the relationship between humanity and the rest of the nature, because humanity also belongs to it. So and in your book, the forest becomes a character, but we don't really have models, I mean very ancient models, the Rerum Natura, Lucretium, but we don't really have models of literature on nature. I want to know your thinking on this turn to nature, animals, also Marlen, in literature in our times. Thank you.
Well, to me, nature is quite a new experience. I spent many years in Stockholm and other cities, and as a normal university intellectual. And when I, for some reason, did move out to this farm and started to explore the forest, I was to me, it's I don't know much about the nature actually. Not knowledge like a scientist. I don't know the names of every animal or every plant. I'm not interested in nature in that way. It's more like you feel like a deep respect for something you don't know really what it is. And of course, the first feeling, the first thought I had when I sort of met nature, it was sort of a theoretical standpoint about nature being the necessity for us living. And I mean, that's a global question, that we need a living biosphere to survive as humankind. But I mean, that's not what you meet when you go out in the forest. It's just the mosquitoes and its branches hitting you in the face, and you stumble around and don't know what you're doing, and you get wet in your boots. It's not nice in that way to be in the nature. But somehow now being out there, well, not living in the forest, but you know, living with the nature. I'm trying to make some work almost every day, so I have a close relationship to the nature. And now I come to it takes some time, it takes years, at least for me, to sort of work up this deep feeling of, I wouldn't say love, but a deep, strong feeling of respect for something that I can never understand. I can never conquer it. I can never control it. And I think the lack of control is maybe the strongest feeling to be there. You see a tree, it has been there for maybe 100 years. You can never fully understand how it got there, how it could be so big, so strong. And it will hopefully live long after I'm dead.
So this is oh, no? Yes, okay. So this is the source of astonishment. There's something that you don't understand, that you live close to, because most of us don't have the experience of nature, the direct experience of nature. I don't know whether you know this poet, American poet Gary Snyder, one of the Beats. He wrote this, Gary Snyder, he wrote this beautiful book called The Practice of the Wild.
Yes.
Which is about his experiences with forestry and living in the woods in Southern California. And he speaks about mountains being alive and this sensation of wonder, you know. I had this professor of anthropology, he always said, man has no nature, he only has culture. Where there is man, I mean man, he said man. Where there is humanity, there is culture, there is no nature. Where there is nature, there is no humanity. And now your book and many works today seem to want to cross that line back. Is that possible for writing? And Marlen, what do you think about this as well?
So I hope it works. Yes, I hear myself. Okay. First, let me thank you for the invitation to be here today with you. I'm very glad. It's a pleasure and an honor for me. And when I arrived here in Brussels, the first minutes, they were dominated by una mezcla, a mixture of languages. So I heard during the first 5 minutes, Flams, then French, then English, then German, and then even Spanish. So I really felt like coming to a kind of home, as I define myself as a European. So, and I think this, the nature is that we as humans should be aware of this part that we live in, of this world that we live in. And you quoted Baudelaire, but I think nowadays we should go back to the Romantics, to Schlegel and Schleiermacher and Caroline Schlegel. So sorry for quoting all German philosophers and writers, but well, that's where I come from, the family, the language family I come from. And they were thinking about nature in a different way, not nature and civilization as two poles of a line, but of nature as a part of our human beings. And this nature is influencing us, but it is also in literature a possibility to show something that you can't bring to speech. So with pictures of nature, with poetry of nature, you can show the inner life, the inner dreams of human beings. And I think that is quite important, and it is not very astonishing that right now we are going back to the Romantics and reading those novels, those experimental fiction, because they had a rich a world of ideas and trying things out. And as Axel mentioned, living in the wood, some years ago, I decided to go back to leave Vienna and to go back to the countryside, and I bought an old farmhouse there. So I live in an old farmhouse, and for me, nature has a second part too. I think living with nature, living with a garden, it not only gives you ground to stand on and a way of constructing your life, your future, but it also gives you the possibility to survive. So it has an economic part in this question too.
Thank you, Marlen. I think Baudelaire, many people saw him as post-romantic, and he was an epigon of the Romantics. But indeed, from the other end, we see him as modern, as breaking with the Romantic tradition. Axel, do you see yourself as a new Romantic in a way? Is there something of the Romantic attitude to nature in your book, in this the material you work with?
I haven't really thought about it, but here's a new thought then. I think the things you described, and when I think of because the farm I live on now, it belonged to my grandfather and my father, but I left it as a very young person. But I think maybe they were romantics in that sense that they were afraid of nature, and that's why they were hostile. I mean, the authors you mentioned, and even my grandfather and father, but their fear was it's shown in their clear cutting. You know what clear cutting is? When you take down all the trees in a big area, you just kill off the forest. And I think you could think of that as a sort of fear. And now, in your first question involved something about being civilized and being intellectual, and the civilization has learned, and I've learned from civilization to be like a smart person, a person who can think and who can conceive a global a global context and understand nature as a biosphere. And maybe that is the next step. But we cannot think of ourselves as something that, I mean, not romantic, because romanticism is over. I hope I belong to now and the future, and I think maybe our possibility to be so knowledgeable and know so many things about the global biosphere and even the civilization as a whole, and how we are able to connect all those data. Maybe the next step is to take a step back. We shouldn't be afraid of nature. Just letting it grow, and like, if it will kill me, I would be happy, because it's better for nature to live on. I will die anyway. And that is not to be afraid. It's just to see the future as bigger than myself and bigger than civilization. Well, I just came up with that now, so don't don't criticize this.
I think no. Let's listen to Marlen's text now, and we will. I need the time to react to that. So let's listen to Marlen's text now. Thank you.
Okay, well, I will read a part of my novel. It's a fiction novel called Living, and okay. And I chose this chapter because I think that it is quite important in order to talk about the future and to have a future, to influence how the future is for us, to know the past. It was springtime, 1938, Marie would say. A spring that broke with surprising force over this land that would no longer be a country. Great Britain, she remembered quite clearly, had just recognized the annexation of Austria to the Altreich. It would have been in May, Marie would tell Lea. That May, with the week of summer weather. That's why they'd joked that the sun seemed determined to console them for the political situation. And Marie would fall silent. They had set out on their way, Hans, Paul, Erika, Rosa, and she, Marie. A birthday present from her two friends, a multi-day hike on the Rex. Erika, Marie would say, picking up the story's thread once again, was Hans' sister. She was a bit unusual, a bit slow, but good company. And Rosa, Rosa. And Marie would sigh. No, she really couldn't explain what Hans must have been thinking, because of course considerations of how to remain safe were the first order of the day for everyone back then. But he must have had something in mind, which is why they wanted to climb that high in the mountains, so they could finally move freely again and talk. On that first night, Marie had gone off on a walk with Hans and Paul. They would have had to speak quietly, out of caution, even though they knew they were alone. Hans was deeply worried. He'd already had a few experiences, but there were also things he could only have guessed at back then. Still, neither she nor Paul had believed his stories. They both called them fanciful. He had told them about Siegfried, his friend from Berlin, the man he'd been in love with a few years earlier. A time of roses, he called those months. Siegfried, Marie would tell Lea decades later, had also not survived. And then Marie would fall silent again. In the years prior to 1933, Siegfried had worked for Hirschfeld. That's how they'd met. Siegfried was a doctor and Hans a medical student at the time. He would not finish his studies. She'd never forget, Marie would say, picking up the thread again, the expression that came across Paul's face when Siegfried's name was mentioned. Restrained, but out of sorts all the same. Paul was a jealous lover, which was dangerous, especially in those times. Marie would look at Lea and ask, does the name Hirschfeld mean anything to you? Hans, Marie was certain, had admired Dr. Hirschfeld's work. Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld created a scientific humanitarian committee and founded the Institute for Sexual Research in Berlin in 1919. He and his colleagues advocated repealing paragraph 175 of the German Penal Code, which criminalized homosexual acts. During the Weimar Republic, a vigorous campaign to abolish paragraph 175 developed. Homosexuals fought for their rights through organizations and societies. They were supported by prominent people, used the press, and were gradually able to create their own subculture. Accordingly, the political parties felt it necessary to take positions on the matter. Some advocated for making the punishments more severe, demanding the sterilization of all homosexuals, preventive detonation, or enforced curative treatment. Anyone who even thinks of homosexual love is our enemy, was the Nazi Party's stance. At the time in the Weimar Republic, Marie would explain, the view that homosexuality was a medical problem was widespread, and all agreed that those who are sick should be treated. Marie would explain, and the spread of the sickness should be prevented lest it become an epidemic. By then, we knew at least a few things that had been happening in earlier years in Hitler's Germany, but still were endlessly naive back then. In the spring of 1938, Marie would say. On May 6, 1933, students from the higher schools of physical education had stormed Hirschfeld's institute. At 3 in the afternoon, Siegfried was in the institute busy cleaning up with his colleagues. SA troops returned. They asked for Dr. Hirschfeld. On hearing that he was abroad due to a bout of malaria, one of the SA soldiers retorted, well, hopefully he'll croak without us doing anything. Then we won't need to hang him or beat his brains out. That night, on the rocks, on Marie's birthday and years after Siegfried's and Paul's death, she had not believed what Hans told her. She wanted to live. And living means loving, Marie would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlen. This is a beautiful text, like Axel's text. I think both are written in a terse, limpid, simple language, which is very direct and goes for the meaning, not for the style, not for the flourish of style, but for the meaning. Your text is more openly political than Axel, although yours is political as well, because especially today, when a man or a human being confronts himself, herself with nature in the current situation, that cannot not be political today. Yours is political in the political sense, in the traditional one, and you go back to the 30s, to Weimar and to the Third Reich. And I think many novelists of our period have been writing about that time, because that was a heroic time where people were confronted with choices. And writers like that, because and our times have been very boring. Now they are getting interesting, and maybe we will miss the boring times. And you are more in a tradition of the engagement, political engagement. Now, my questions here in this sort of second part is, what is the public role of the writer, and how should he or she engage with society's problems, with society's difficulties, and be effective in that sphere? Thank you.
Well, should I start? Okay. Well, this fiction novel, Living, contains of two parts. So on the one hand, you have the 30s, and these quotations out of diaries, letters, historical documents. And there is a second part, a young woman coming from Sarajevo to Austria, and she's a filmmaker, and she's working there, and she still sees that the history is influencing her way of life, is influencing her thinking, is influencing how she feels when she goes through the cities and when she gets in contact with people. So she carries all her story. And I think this is something very symptomatic for us. We have our past like a rucksack, so, well, and we carry it on. And even if we don't want to put it on our shoulders, we have it. And I think the writer should be aware of that. So on the one hand, we have the possibility to jump in the run of the world, to stop it and to say, okay, here is our mirror, here is our literature, look at it. We want to show you not only how the world is or how we see it, because it's always our consciousness that is in the books, but also on how it could be or how it should be. Yeah, and I think that is very, very important if we talk about politics in literature, that we always have this in mind. So first, it's through our eyes that we look at the world, and second, that we have this possibility to dream, to get in the illusion, to get in fiction, how world could be. And I think it's an important thing to imagine, because otherwise we can't think of any future at all, if we can't imagine anymore.
Axel, how do you see the public role of the writer? Should there be a public role? How should it be deployed?
I think it's a hard question, a complicated question, because there are political literature that's not, I wouldn't say not good, but it's not interesting because it's too direct, and it's tend to be like in instruction for something specific. I think, and I can't really say what my role as an author in the public should be. That's strange, but sometimes I got that question before, and I think I can compare it with being a parent. What can you say to your children? Not that the readers are children, but it's. I try not to specifically learn my children anything specific, but rather give them like a safe structure to be able to feel deep feelings and to be have the courage to take a stand when it's needed, something like that. And I also try, now that my children are a little bit bigger, older, I realize that it's more possible to have direct discussions on how to be and how to act. And I think the only thing I can bring to them that really can stand for is, don't try too hard to be successful in this world, because no one is ever going to thank you. You only have to feel your own thankfulness for what you do and how you act. And maybe that is the author's role in society and towards its readers. To be an author is to be free. You don't have any. No one asks you to write a book, really. There are thousands other authors. They don't need me, really. So you're totally free. When you start to write, you're totally free. And that gives you an opportunity to think outside the box, to think of the future as totally open. And if you can give that to readers, to your children, I think that's enough.
You think you're free? Mr. Freud would say that you're not. You're not free. You search your material. Your material is predetermined for you. Is what moves you. What you're drawn to a material, and sometimes you may be separated from it. It will be difficult for you to write about the material that you should write about. And this is another question I would have to Marlen. I think your work and this fragment you read, it's a lot about identity. It's a lot about history, about identity. There is a country that disappears there in the beginning, and the country that was not to be anymore. There is homosexuality. It's written in the third person, but of course the third person can be all-encompassing. You embrace all the characters. So this is a question I have for you too. In this current globalized, complex, confusing world, where are you writing from? Who are you when you write? And the writer is never the person. Proust said this in Contre Sainte-Beuve. The writer is always somebody else. Who are you when you're writing? Are you determined by your gender, by your nationality, by any other sort of identity?
Well, first of all, I would say writing means looking at myself, thinking. And this is a quote, and it was written by Antje Ravik-Strubel, a German writer. And I would like to quote Sylvia Plath too. Writing is a religious act. And I think when you write, when you start to invent a fictional universe, you are on the one hand yourself, you are looking with your background, with your stories, with your society, your surroundings, on a certain topic, on the one hand, but then you try to you change your role. So from the first part, Mario Vargas Llosa said, "You are naked," and then this changing means that it's like putting more and more on your skin. And I think this is a very, very important thing. So not to write only as myself, but in the end, when it is done, when the work is done, I do have quite often the impression that I not only write as myself, but as a member of my society, of the contemporaries. And I think this is quite important, because otherwise you are just looking, we have this German word, Nabelschau, and of course I don't remember now this word, not in English at all, so it means looking at your
belly button.
Yeah, your belly button. And if you just look at your belly button, then you don't see anything at all and you don't see the others. And I think if you just focus on yourself, and it's just looking on the belly button, so
Axel.
it's not interesting.
I think I saw some years ago, say 20, 15 years ago, when I lived in Stockholm and I was working at the university. I think I was looking at the belly bottom of the university and the maybe in the broader sense the intellectual world. So it's not completely true, but to me it worked out this way. I couldn't stand this by then. So I moved out to the countryside and started working with the animals and with the trees. And then I realized, oh, this is good points to start writing. Because now it's not the intellectual belly button, because now I'm with the animals, I'm with the trees. And I take that experience and starts to write. So if you ask me who I am when I write, I am a tree handler. I'm a working person. Most of my days I work with my hands, and that's where I start to write. And yeah,
that's liberating. I think many writers do handwork. And many writers walk in the forest, and many writers write while walking, because I think writing in the end is a very physical activity.
Yes.
It's not, or shouldn't be, so intellectual as it is depicted. I would now like to read what Jorge Carrion has sent, because he sent a text, and I think his text opens up to another theme, which is the one with which I would like to close our discussion, and then we can have some questions from the audience, which is the relationship between technology and writing. I will read from him. So 4 years ago, I, meaning Jorge, published a manifesto against Amazon. I have no personal issues with or against Amazon, but I don't like how Jeff Bezos has used books, literature, and culture to turn himself into a billionaire. I am going to read, Jorge, a few lines from that manifesto, translated into English by my friend Peter Bush. This is the text from the book Against Amazon. Our moment has come. Amazon appropriated our books. We will appropriate Amazon logic. First, by convincing other readers of the need to keep time on hold. Desire cannot be fulfilled immediately, because it then ceases to be desire and becomes nothing at all. Desire should last. I must go to the bookshop, look for the book, find it, live through it, decide if the desire was warranted, perhaps abandon the book and cherish the desire for another, until I find it, or not. It wasn't there. I ordered it. It will come in 24 hours or in 72 hours. I'll be able to give it a glance. I will finally buy it. Perhaps I will read it. Perhaps I won't. Perhaps I'll let my desire go cold for a few days or weeks or months or years. It will be there in the right place on the right shelf, and I will always remember in which bookshop I bought it and why. Because a bookshop gives you a memory of your purchase. If you buy on Amazon, on the other hand, the experience is the same as the one before and after. The aura around each book you read becomes diffuse and blurred. Once we have tamed time and desire, perhaps the moment will come to go one step further and put a bit of everything on the shelves. Let's not be afraid of mixtures. It's what makes us human. This is the quotation from the book. And then Jorge Carrion adds, I'm not interested in the debate between fiction and non-fiction. We have to open the categories of literary genre in the same way we have opened the concept of gender. The question of genre and gender is central in contemporary literature because it is central in our culture and society. In a gender-fluid world, we have to find gender-fluid ways of communicating ideas and telling stories. I don't know if the difference between fiction and non-fiction is important, but I know that it is essential to stop writing about ourselves and start writing about others. This is similar to what you were saying. And I believe that it is also important to think of new utopias. Again, we have an echo there. We are sick of pandemias and dystopias. During the last 1.5 years, museums, bookshops, libraries have reacted quickly and in very relevant ways. At the moment, Europe enjoys the highest reading rates compared to recent years. I attended a booksellers meeting in Lisbon a month ago, and everyone agreed that they are selling more than ever. Mm-hmm. The challenge now is to anticipate the next crisis and to be proactive instead of reactive then. The next step, Carrion says, after digitalization or digitization is the Internet of Things. How can museums, bookstores, libraries prepare for this revolution right now? How can they start using artificial intelligence now? The question is not about separating more and more the human reading from the algorithmic one, but to already look for forms of cooperation. I am sure that throughout the entire 21st century, there will be books and that there will be readers and reading. I am also convinced that books, as well as the experience of reading, will be much more hybrid than they are today. Let's start working so that this hybridization is favorable for humanism, for literature. Let's not leave culture in the hands of platforms and algorithms. So this is it's a manifesto. It looks like Benjamin's political writings almost. It's very exciting because it's not nostalgic. It speaks about the future. However, I wonder, and I want to know what you think, is this technology, this globalized technology and digital world compatible with genuine writing? I have the impression that writing, literature, reading is not valued socially as much as it used to be. There may be a lot of reading, but I don't know whether people are reading rightly or the right things or in the right way. I just wonder. I hope I would agree with Jorge's optimism, but it's a difficult subject. Who wants to start?
Yes, I agree with you too concerning the question if artificial. Because right now we do have these artificial intelligent programs that can or should be able, I don't think they can, to write a novel. Yeah, I think that is not a novel. It is a kind of, okay, experiment, and we can look at it and we can discuss it afterwards, and that's okay. But it's not a novel. it's not a story or however you call it. So I think these are two pair of shoes. But I think we have the duty to use technological inventions consciously. So on the one hand, if we have industry with robots, they can help the workers not to carry thousands of tons in a month, a year. So this is a good thing. On the other hand, somebody is losing a job because of the robots. I think this example shows quite well that we have to discuss how we use technology. And I don't think that if we talk about reading, literature, culture, I don't think that it will go down just because of technological inventions. So for example, we have the e-reader. And we all know that the writers of literary, they don't sell less books because of the e-readers. We sell the same. So just concerning novels on e-readers, well, that's about not at all 10% in Austria. So 90% is still book because readers love books. And reading was never, or the contact with culture was never a mainstream program. It was always a small group of the society who was reading. So our impact is now to motivate kids to read. And I think this is more important than thinking about, is this artificial intelligence program able to write a novel or not? No, it isn't. So that's what I think, but well, okay. But I think this is the main topic that we have to focus, that we have in the future still readers in our society.
I find it difficult to motivate my kids to read because video games seem much more exciting to them. I don't know, Axel, what you think about this. Can technology and genuine writing go together, or is genuine writing a civilizational artifact that is in the wane in a way, because no longer able to satisfy this desire that Jorge is talking about?
Ooh. Well, I really liked what Jorge wrote about. I myself is totally anarchistic about genres, and I think really a free mind should use all technology and all information and all possibilities that's out there. But at the same time, it is a risk of marginalization, I think. You try to say something special, which on the one hand can be, it's everyone can relate to it, and now we understand something big. But on the other hand, it can be totally marginalized in the big flow of information. And I really like your thought, Marlen, about it's always been a very small group that's been reading historically. And about the kids, I think what's fascinating is that they play those video games and they have access to YouTube and this immense amount of information, but at the same time they read a lot. And somehow they find time. I don't know what I did when I was a kid, because I read books, but I didn't have time to do anything else. But they seem to find time and have capacity to do everything. So I don't think, yeah. But I have to say another thing about Jorge's text, which I like, and which is connected to my writing and my relationship to the forest. I always, well, not always, but when it comes up, I try to say that I'm hostile to technology, and what I mean is that I don't like big forest machines, which which are about to kill forest in the world. I'm hostile to them, but and they are like the highest level of technology in the world, those machines, and I don't like them. But when I say that, people answer with the question, don't you like medicine? Don't you like reading Homer on your computer? And I think maybe the thing is we need to learn to use some technology, but maybe not all.
I think we are free to decide.
I wish this were true, but for us who have become adults before this technological influx, it's easier to choose. For people, children who are born with it, I think it's the technology using them rather than them using the technology. But I think we've reached a point where we should open the floor to the audience to see if they have some questions for you. So, who would like to? And before we freeze, I'm starting to tremble. It's really cold. So, questions from the audience. Who shoots first? Come on. Here.
To you too, a question. To you, would you be able to write something about nature like him? And to you the question, would you be able to write something about black moments in the history of Sweden, like they treated the Sami, for example? Or are you in your cage, nature, you politics? Thank you.
Yes, I am able. I think that every story you have in mind, that you are building, this universe that you are creating, is demanding for a certain structure and for a certain language too. So when I look, or when critics look at my books, then they see that they differ a lot. So there is poetry, there are essays, there are political themes, and there are very quiet tunes and very hard ones, ironic ones, because I think it always depends on the universe that you create. So this is for me a quite important question when I have an idea in mind. And for me, ideas, most of them, they come from a human being that I see, a person that I see in my imagination, or a sentence. And it's just a small theme of something. And when I want this seed to grow, then I have to ask myself, which language, which structure, who is the narrator, how should I organize all that? And I think this is one of the things I love about my work, that I can be, every time when I write, a completely different person and design a complete different universe. I think that's very important, because otherwise, I hate it when critics write about a writer, oh, he or she has found her voice. And then they are so proud, yes, because they have found their voice, and I think that's stupid. You should not find your voice. You should try to get a new voice in every work you do.
Well, I think I might be able, but I'm not sure it would be very interesting to read. I think I have very not too big visions about my own authorship. I think this is just me, but I think to write is. I try to see myself and other persons as like an organic whole, and for me, maybe I can change my life, but for me now, it wouldn't be interesting. It wouldn't be like true if I tried to write something that's far outside my life that I live. Yeah, that's my answer.
If I may, I think the Americans say different strokes for different folks. I mean, you have different kinds of authors, and they are all drawn into the material that they find that is touching them inside. For Axel, clearly, is something more intimate, something that has to do with his daily life, his inner spiritual experience, and his surroundings, his immediate surroundings, and that's the kind of writer you are.
And sorry, but it's also
whereas Marlen is more different voices, different things that touch you. It's a different kind of writing, because probably this has something to do with your personality as well.
I think so. I hate being put into a Schublade. Help me. In a box. Yeah. Today I am this, and tomorrow I'm another person, and I don't want to be. I hate all these state of mind. They are just like, for me, they are narrowing me. So I don't like that. But maybe that's my temperament. So.
yeah. Okay, I forgot what.
I'm so sorry. Other questions? Maybe one more question, and maybe Axel in the meantime will remember.
No, it was something about that when I left the city and the university, I had a feeling that I didn't like literature. Now, I wouldn't be so harsh now, but my project is about being sort of too much maybe, but my project is about not being literature, and I try to move away from this sense of this notion of literature. Literature can be anything. For me, it cannot be anything. It has to be me, and rooted in my day-to-day life.
Other questions? One more question, maybe, before closing.
Need to go.
So if not, I think then we will stop here with many voices in Marlen Schachinger, and it has to be me in Axel Lindén. So both poles of the literary experience, the solipsistic and the more, how can I say, global or yeah.
Fluent.
So thank you very much, and thanks to the author.
Thank you.